So who is SIG PM? SIG PM is a special interest group that is dedicated to building, deploying, maintaining, supporting, and using, wow, that is the wrong line. This line is, sorry. It is not dedicated to Azure at all. It's dedicated to the program product and project management processes that live within the Kubernetes community. The chairs for SIG PM are Caleb Miles at Pivotal, Jay Singer-Dumars at Google, Lockie Evenson at Microsoft, and myself at VMware. If you want to check out where we are hanging out in the community repo, it is github.com, Kubernetes community / SIG PM. So what is SIG PM? As I mentioned, it is program, product, and project management for Kubernetes. What's kind of interesting about doing this within an open source community is there's no sense of executive buy-in. There's it's the usual ladder that you have to deal with in terms of finding a stakeholder, product owners, and building out a project program as you would within a company. Essentially, it doesn't exist within the open source community. So we're essentially trying to build this idea by building trust within the community, right? Leveraging and really understanding the specific use cases that people have across the 32, 33 at this point, SIGs that live in the community. So what can we do to organize some of this effort, right? So we want to organize across a few different domains, right? One is the idea of KEPs. So KEPs are Kubernetes enhancement proposals. Essentially, this is the canonical document that you submit to the community when you want to introduce some change within the community, right? So whether it's a change to an API, whether it is a change to a process that lives within a SIG or a committee, all of that we try to feed through this KEPs process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the KEPs. We also focus on project management, so actually building out boards on GitHub and making sure that people do the stuff that they have signed up to do. So collating GitHub issues both within my SIGs. So I also run SIG release and am emeritus chair for SIG Azure. So a lot of the focus is in providing kind of a roadmap for the people who might be leveraging GitHub project boards. So we're focusing on building automation around these things, which kind of didn't exist today, and we're getting a lot closer. We have plugins, so if anyone's used Prow, where we can turn on essentially a project board plugin, which will, as you open issues in specific repos, it will toss them onto project boards for specific SIGs. So little by little, we're moving into that space. The CNCF end user community. So we are also the survey generation body of Kubernetes. So if you've seen a survey come out of the Kubernetes community, it probably was generated by us in some form, or we worked on workshopping the details of that survey. So what we like to do here is try to provide a feedback loop between the upstream community and between the end user community within the CNCF, are the people who are actually consuming Kubernetes and cloud native technologies. So we meet that group on a at least 6-month basis. We're trying to make that loop a little tighter. And then finally, external communications, right? So how do we speak to you, right? How do we build a marketing campaign essentially around what Kubernetes might be? Maybe we've done a release recently, maybe a webinar is coming up, maybe someone has just done a blog post, a podcast. So trying to funnel all of that stuff into one succinct place. We also work on that in conjunction with SIG contributor experience. So going a little deeper into the KEPs, what are the KEPs? Why KEPs? Why are they so great? I love KEPs. You might have seen a picture with me going KEPs earlier. So KEPs are meant to be the steel thread by which we propose change to the community, right? The reason that we want to have a succinct process for this is so that we can capture the motivation behind these changes. And it doesn't just become a discussion that happened on Slack. It doesn't become something that happened in a video chat. It's something that we commit to the project's memory, which is GitHub for all intents and purposes. So we want to create that artifact that is, one, easy to consume, and two, it's something that we can track changes in that artifact over time, right? So as KEPs move through a variety of stages, right, from proposed to implementable to implemented, perhaps. There's also deferred and rejected, depending on how a SIG may feel about the specific idea, right? So we, by capturing it in GitHub, we have the means to look back and see when, why we made the decisions we did, and those conversations are captured within GitHub as well. So the grand scheme is to eventually get to a place where we can elicit a product roadmap out of Kubernetes, right? So the idea of having product roadmap for something that is this kind of amorphous blob that grows, and getting, so we often get reporters or vendor companies or users asking what's next in Kubernetes, and sometimes we don't know. So the idea is taking a bunch of KEPs, being able to scrape the data from these KEPs, being able to bubble up some common themes, and start to build a product roadmap based on that. So the project management section, the project management subproject, we're working on, again, trivializing the project-wide issue triage. One of the largest issues that we have in the community is triage. So if you've ever visited Kubernetes, the in-tree Kubernetes, and checked out how many issues are open at any one time, they could be up to 1,000, I think it's 1,200 right now. And that's not counting any of the PRs that are open, which I think we're at somewhere between 200 and 400 at any one time. So the way we carve up some of this work in SIG release, actually, is we have a bug triage role within SIG release, and that is, it's a group of 4 or 5 people that every quarter get together and they walk through all of the issues and bug people about these issues that are open. And as you can imagine, for 1,000+ issues, it's not an easy feat, right? So we have to make sure that the work that is done is not done by only 5 people that only know the job for a quarter and then cycle out. We have to build something that is automatable for this to be successful. We also want to leverage the talents of the people that are in the room, the people that are generally interested in project program, product management, to actually get a body of project managers who want to work on this kind of stuff, right? So the same way that we would build, so I try to run sprintish things within my SIGs, and the same way we would act internally, we want to try to act for an open source community, right? It is something that is, because again, the incentives for working in open source compared to the incentives for completing work at your job are very different, right? So figuring out a way to align these interests and burn down these project backlogs. So again, there are 30+ SIGs. There are multiple working groups, multiple sub-projects within those SIGs, multiple committees at this point, all of which have their own very unique work. So trying to find people who understand that work, who may already work in that SIG, that sub-project, and aligning them with project management duties, right? So the CNCF end user community, what we want to do here is, so as the slide says, I got a nice little quote. The end user community is growing, and it's made up of 85+ companies. So these are companies that are consuming Kubernetes day to day, not just Kubernetes, but things within the CNCF, the cloud native landscape, right? So again, this is creating a strong feedback loop between the CNCF end user community group and SIG PM to figure out how we actually meet the needs of our customers, right? Because we are serving customers, whether you're a vendor company, whether you're a core committer to Kubernetes, right? We do have customers. All right, and external communications. This is standardizing the way that we gather information and disseminate it. So as I was mentioning, the blog posts, the podcasts, surveys, making sure that has a consistent voice, right? So these things kind of funnel through us. They funnel through a few different places, whether it be on the SIG release or the contributor experience side. We all work together to make sure that we are talking Kubernetes. And then also enable the SIGs and other bodies of work to actually celebrate their work. I think that's, if you're familiar with the developers, they have the tendency to, they're not, they don't like to hype themselves up, right? They kind of like heads down, like, oh, I did a thing, great. But we want to say, we did all of these things over, over a cycle, over multiple cycles, over this year. How do we aggregate all of that work and actually celebrate the people who are doing it day to day? Ways that you can help. We have a mailing list. We have a Slack channel. We have a meeting. So the mailing list is Kubernetes SIG PM at googlegroups.com. The Slack channel is SIG PM. We decided not to get too adventurous with that name. So if you're on Kubernetes Slack, you can join SIG PM and hang out with us. We have a few project boards where you can check out our work. So that is github.com/orgs, Kubernetes projects 14 is our primary board, and then projects/5 is the KEP implementation tracking. So KEPs are an iterative process, and what we're trying to do is basically go through that process and improve it with everyone in the community. So I think this might be the questions slide. Yeah, questions. Cool. Okay, cool.
How many KEPs are submitted and like what percent actually make it into the project?
Aha, okay. So at any one time, we have a set of, so the question was how many KEPs are submitted and how many make it into the project, right? So at any one time, we also have enhancement tracking issues. And at any one time, there are about 150 of those open, tracking status across features, enhancements that have been open for years, right? So you take pod security policy, like that one is still open. So walking through that process, you essentially create a KEP, dictate the work that the statement of work. The hope is that between code freeze, which is towards the end of the cycle. We're actually in code freeze right now for Kubernetes 1.17, and a month into the next cycle. That is essentially our collection period for KEPs, right? So every submission of a KEP, then your SIG reviews it, or someone bugs your SIG to review them. And I would say that during any one release, we may accept about 45, and probably 20% of that will drop out. So you'll end up closer to somewhere in the 20s range, right? And these are not necessarily net new. Maybe we're graduating something from alpha to beta to GA. So we have an enhancements team as well on the release team that is similar to that set of 5 people that are doing the bug triage. It's a set of about 5 people who are doing enhancements collection and bugging people, knocking down doors at SIGs, and trying to see what's going to go into the release ahead of time. This also informs like the blog posts, the webinars that end up happening. There's also a communications team that works directly with the CNCF. So we work basically the enhancements, release notes, and communications work very closely to make that happen. So there's no good answer. It changes. There are some wavy metrics, but getting to the point where we have more process around doing project management, SIG by SIG, we'll get closer to the place where we can start to forecast that work. Cool.
Since Kubernetes is driven by a lot of companies, right? So a lot of companies request a lot of features and a direction, basically. So do you get context in terms of directions and features, and how do you go about it?
Yeah, sure. So the question was, Kubernetes is driven by lots of companies, and lots of companies are requesting features at any one time. How do we balance those priorities and those requests without getting into conflict, right? And it's tricky, right? I think, as someone who works at a vendor company and as someone who has worked at multiple vendor companies in the Kubernetes space. It is always fun to deal with the upstream politics. I think that what we have to come to the table with is, what is the best idea, right? Let's try to make sure that the best idea wins, and then we push all of the effort behind it. So one of the recent success stories, I guess, would be Cluster API, right? So Cluster API is a project that is within SIG cluster lifecycle, and it's worked on by some of the people who are in this room, actually, right? So you've got VMware, Red Hat, New Relic, D2iQ, Microsoft. I forget Microsoft, and I work with them. So it's always like interesting to see figuring out what we actually need. I think that over time we've gotten to a good place where we can all chat like adults and figure out what's best for the community and move forward that way. There are always going to be conflicting priorities. I think some of that can be seen in the amount of deployment or configuration management tools that we have for Kubernetes, or the way that we do manifests. There are some opinionated ways of doing each of these things, and you can see that emerge, especially when there is not a succinct community solution for something. So it takes time. I think we're doing a really good job of it over the last few years, but it is difficult. There's no one right answer for it. Mm-hmm.
How much product management actually happens in there versus, the SIG community themselves are deciding a lot of things? Like, how much can you influence the roadmap?
Right. So
By being in this community, how much can you influence the roadmap and the strategy?
yeah, sure. So the question was, as a product manager, like, how can you actually influence the roadmap for Kubernetes, right? Actually change product across multiple companies, right? And it really is, you don't have to be in any one role, right? You don't have to be a product, program, project, software engineer, anything, right? You have to show up, right? I think the people who get work done are people who show up. So it's interesting to see the way it works, especially working at a vendor company, when we have ideas and then we show up in the community and we present the idea and it sounds good for everyone, and we activate essentially this global community to work on one specific idea. So I think a big part of it is just showing up. There have been other communities where attempts have been made to control a roadmap, and that is never successful, right? So it's get involved, understand the process, and be honest about what you want out of the process, right? It really is showing up. If I can, that one thing, showing up. More questions?
Can you talk about SIG PM is one of the ones that goes horizontal rather than vertical,
Right.
in your project overall? So can you talk about like the work that you're doing and how it kind of informs the best practices in the other SIGs?
Yeah, sure. So Taylor was saying that SIG PM is one of the horizontal SIGs in Kubernetes. Can we talk a little bit about how the work that we do in SIG PM kind of filters out to the rest of the SIGs, right? So the way Kubernetes is organized, primarily by SIG, governance-wise. So there are horizontal and project groups that cross-cut multiple efforts, and then there are vertical groups. So vertical groups could be like the cloud providers, for example, where they work in kind of like a very specific silo of Kubernetes. So I really enjoy working on the vertical groups. I work on a few of them, this and SIG release, and to see the work that you do kind of go out into the project. The enhancements portion of the release team, so we work directly with release. it's weird because I'm wearing both hats at once. So you've got the enhancements portion where you've got a group that we build within the release team to help inform the entire release for that cycle. There's the communications aspect of it also within the release team, and the release notes aspect of it, right, which is kind of us, which is kind of release. That's kind of every SIG. But I have to say the KEPS process has been one of those things that have, it was bumpy at the start, and I think it's something that people have started to realize, like, it's really important for us to capture the intent of what we're trying to do over time. So that has taken off over the last year and a half or so, and I think that's one of the singular biggest efforts that we've had that has real impact in the project. So yeah.
Since it's a community-driven project, like community-driven effort in terms of PM, right? So how do you ensure accountability in terms of release or the goals when it comes to the community?
Right, so the question was how do we essentially build accountability given that it is a community project? And it's time. It's partly is showing up. It's showing up and starting to know the people who show up consistently, right? It's building that trust over time. It's not something that I have like this problem specifically in release because I build the release managers team, right? The people who actually can push a button on their laptop and cut Kubernetes, right? And that's trust that, like, if I'm giving you keys to the kingdom, I have to know that I can trust you. And you prove that trust by showing up, working on issues, working on code. Yeah, it's not easy, and we don't have a roadmap for it, unfortunately. It really is hoping that people show up, hoping that people are dedicated to the work and honest in the work that they do, and then building trust as a result of that. Yep. Yeah.
So you mentioned using KEPS to elicit the product needs and inform the product roadmap. Can you talk a little bit more about that process, and then also how far out does the product roadmap go?
Okay. So the question was, we're using KEPS to kind of elicit product themes. What is the KEP process, and how far out can we essentially generate a roadmap? We can't today. Roadmap-wise, we do it cycle by cycle. There are some people who are working closer to the code within the SIGs that are able to forecast a little better based on who is in their SIG and what projects they may be working on at work at any one time. So the KEP process is, you start off with a proposed KEP, right? There is a markdown template, which I think I can, do I tempt it? I don't know. I'll go for it, I'll try it. All right, so you can see 150 issues open, 114 pull requests for these KEPs, right? So let's pick off the top of the stack. Right, so this is kind of the template, and if we take a look at it, right, so you won't see the metadata in the, oh, you won't, all right. So we've got a title, we've got authors for the KEP, an owning SIG, participating SIGs, reviewers, approvers, editors, the creation date, last updated status, and anything that we might want to connect to that KEP, right? Additional documentation, what have you. So we start off with a summary, motivation, right? So really, I want to understand why you are bringing this enhancement to the project, right? And I, as in the entire community, right? And like what the motivation for it is, what you're looking to get out of it, because often setting these goals and non-goals allows us to kick work out, right? Or more tightly scope the work that we want to do. Then we get down to the proposal. Sometimes we'll have a few user stories, right? So here, canonical use case of the bounds to control primary scaling condition, right? So this one is talking about multi-thresholds based auto scaling, which I don't know anything about. But essentially, you can see we're laying down some user stories and including what the spec for that new piece of code may look like, as well as pretty pictures, graphs. And then further down in the cap, this is really nicely done, actually. So what's nice to see is if we get some pseudocode, right? So this is a partial implementation of what that feature might look like, what that enhancement might look like. And then we get into some of the nitty-gritty of, just kidding, no, design details, right? So within design details, we also have we want to get a semblance of what your story is, right? What the implementation details behind the thing that you're working on, as well as, so I'm going to show you the template. And right. Right, so you copy one of these templates, you fill out the people who will be working with you on this, and you can see that these are the different statuses: provisional, implementable, implemented, deferred, rejected, withdrawn, and replaced, right? So, you should also see, we heard you like keps, and everyone gets a kep, right? And so that's informing, but this template it's not just a template, it's also instructions. So pick a title, figure out who your hosting SIG is, start to fill out some of the overviews, what have you, and then you finally get down to creating a PR that looks like the one that we just looked over, right? Build the table of contents, there's a release sign-off checklist, and the release sign-off checklist is something that the release team looks into to say, this is something that we can actually ship for this release, right? So it's, do you have an enhancement issue? Have the approvers of the KEP actually flip the KEP status to implementable? Do we actually have design details for this enhancement? Do we have a test plan in place? This is one of the things that is hugely important and gets missed very often. And also, if it is something that is core to Kubernetes, can we talk to, have we had that discussion with SIG architecture and SIG testing to make sure that that test plan seems sound, right? Getting that user-facing documentation, as well as any supporting documentation, design details, past design proposals that inform some of the decisions that are made in that KEP, and then kind of walking through those sections that we were talking about a little earlier, right? So design details, and we give you hints about the Kubernetes testing guidelines, the graduation criteria, the API guarantees, the deprecation policy. And so, yeah, we try to give you hints along the way. I think the template has gotten pretty good. Still some things to do. And then finally, drawbacks, alternatives, and any of the infrastructure that you might require to get this work done, right? So if you take something like a KEP that may be coming out of working group Kate's Infra, they need infrastructure to do that, right? They need accounts on GCP and what have you. So yeah, that's quick speed run through the KEP template. I think we're at time. I want to say we're at time. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you everyone for showing up, and enjoy the rest of your KubeCon.